In 1984, archaeologists excavating a site in Turkey uncovered a set of human remains dating back roughly 10,000 years. The person had been tall, broad-shouldered, dense bones, no cavities, no signs of chronic disease, no evidence of the kind of skeletal wear that comes from repetitive, grinding labor. Then they found the remains of people from the same region just 1,000 years later. Shorter, weaker bones, cavities everywhere, signs of anemia, evidence of chronic infection, same location, same genetic population, 1,000 years apart. The only thing that had changed was what they were doing with their days. The first group were hunter-gatherers, the second group were farmers. And what happened between them is one of the most important and most ignored stories in the history of our species. Let's start with the bones. Skeletal records are some of the most reliable data we have about how humans actually lived before written history. Bones record everything. How much you moved, what you ate, whether you were sick, whether you were stressed, how hard your body worked, and for how long. And what the bones from pre-agricultural humans tell us consistently across dozens of excavation sites on multiple continents is uncomfortable. Male hunter-gatherers averaged around 5 feet 10 inches tall. After the agricultural revolution, that average dropped to about 5 feet 3 inches and didn't recover to pre-agricultural levels until the 20th century. That's roughly 7 inches of height lost across an entire species in under 2,000 years. Bone density follows the same pattern. Hunter-gatherer remains show dense, robust skeletal structures consistent with varied, high-load physical activity. Post-agricultural remains show thinner bones, more fractures, more signs of structural weakness. Then there are the teeth. A hunter-gatherer's teeth are remarkable, straight, properly spaced, almost no cavities. The jaw is wide and fully developed with room for wisdom teeth to emerge without crowding. After agriculture, the teeth fall apart almost immediately. Cavities become common, jaws narrow, teeth crowd and overlap. Enamel thins. Gum disease appears in the record for the first time. Anthropologist Clark Spencer Larson spent decades compiling skeletal evidence from the agricultural transition and reached a conclusion that stops most people cold. The adoption of farming was, in purely biological terms, one of the worst things that ever happened to the human body. So, what happened? The answer is simpler than you'd expect, and more disturbing. Hunter-gatherers ate an enormous variety of foods. Depending on the region, a typical group might consume between 80 and 200 different plant and animal species across a year. Different seasons, different landscapes, different nutritional profiles. Their bodies were getting everything: protein, fat, micronutrients, fiber, minerals, all of it, constantly varied, constantly replenished. Then farming arrived, and suddenly the entire diet collapsed into 2 or 3 crops: wheat, rice, maize. Whatever grew in that region, whatever could be stored, whatever could feed the most people on the least land. The calories went up. The nutrition went off a cliff. Farming produces more food per acre than hunting and gathering. That is inarguably true. It can support far more people in far less space. But the food it produces is monotonous in ways the human body was never designed to handle. Grain-heavy diets are high in carbohydrates and low in the micronutrients. Hunter-gatherers got automatically from dietary variety. The result was bodies that were fed, but not nourished. Caloric surplus, nutritional collapse, more people alive, all of them slightly worse off than the people who came before them. But the height and the teeth are actually the least disturbing part. Because the same pattern shows up in the brain. Human brain size peaked roughly 30,000 years ago. Since then, our brains have been getting smaller. The average human brain today is about 10% smaller than it was at the peak of the hunter-gatherer era. 10%. That is not a rounding error. That is roughly the size of a tennis ball worth of neural tissue that our species has lost since the last ice age. Anthropologists debate the cause. Some point to the same dietary collapse. The brain is a metabolically expensive organ, and it runs on fat and protein. Strip those out of the diet and the brain pays the price across generations. Others point to something called the domestication hypothesis. The idea is this: as humans built larger societies with more division of labor and more social infrastructure, individual cognitive demands went down. A hunter-gatherer needed to track animal behavior across dozens of square miles of terrain, navigate by stars, read weather patterns, identify hundreds of plant species by sight and season, solve novel problems every single day with no safety net. Think about what your brain does in a single day. Now think about what theirs had to do just to stay alive. In complex agricultural societies, you specialize. You do one thing, someone else does the other things. The group carries the cognitive load that the individual used to carry alone. That is efficient. It scales. It builds civilizations. It may also be slowly shrinking the individual brain that makes it all possible. Now, the counter-argument. Because there is one, and it is real, and it deserves to be taken seriously. Life expectancy. A male hunter-gatherer in the Paleolithic era had a life expectancy at birth of roughly 33 years. Today, global average life expectancy is over 70. Modern medicine has eliminated diseases that killed millions: smallpox, polio, cholera, plague. All of them erased or contained by agricultural surplus, by the cities it made possible, by the science those cities produced. The infant mortality rate in pre-agricultural societies was catastrophic by modern standards. Half of all children born never reached adulthood. Modern sanitation, refrigeration, antibiotics, surgery, none of these exist without the agricultural revolution as the foundation they were built on. And that is not a small thing. That is most of human history as we know it. The mainstream argument is straightforward. Yes, the transition was rough. Yes, the bodies got worse for a while. But the long game was worth it. We got to modernity. We got to medicine. We got to now. That argument is hard to dismiss. But here is where it gets complicated. Because the counter-argument handles the quantity of life almost perfectly. It does not handle the quality of the body. It does not handle the quality of the mind. And it does not handle something harder to measure, but impossible to ignore. Anthropologists who have studied surviving hunter-gatherer societies, the few that still exist, report something consistent and unexpected. These groups typically work between 15 and 20 hours per week to meet all of their nutritional needs. Not 40, not 60, 15 to 20. The rest of the time is spent in social interaction, storytelling, rest, play, and what we would now call leisure. Early agricultural societies, by contrast, worked from sunrise to sunset, 6 or 7 days a week, just to grow enough food to survive the winter. Jared Diamond, one of the most cited evolutionary biologists of the last 50 years, called the agricultural revolution the worst mistake in the history of the human race. Not because it failed, because it succeeded, and the price of that success was paid in bodies, in minds, and in time. And we have been paying it ever since without knowing the original cost. That skeleton from Turkey is still in a museum somewhere. Tall, dense bones, perfect teeth. Dead at what we would now call middle age, probably from an injury or an infection that a single course of antibiotics would have solved in 72 hours. And that is the thing that makes this question impossible to close. The bones tell one story. The life expectancy tables tell another. The brain size data sits quietly in the middle, declining across 30,000 years, not caring which side wins the argument. We did not make one trade when we picked up the first farming tool. We made thousands of them, simultaneously, across generations that had no way to see the full picture of what they were exchanging. They gave up variety for stability. They gave up physical robustness for caloric security. They gave up cognitive range for cognitive specialization. They gave up time for infrastructure. And here we are, at the top of the food chain, living longer than any human generation before us. Shorter than our ancestors, smaller brained than our ancestors, working more hours than hunter-gatherers did, eating a narrower range of foods than any human population in the last 300,000 years. The progress is real. The cost was real. The question nobody has fully answered yet is whether we would have made the same trades if we had known what we were giving up. And the quieter question underneath that one, the one that skeleton keeps asking, is whether we still can.